more demand for professional archaeologists? A good career choice there?
You have to be really good at what you do to become a professional archaeologist. The bulk of people, if they're interested in archaeology, but if they want to earn a daily living, if you were, I'd actually recommend not becoming an archaeologist. It's rather hard to get a job as an archaeologist. The Archaeological Society of Virginia and other organizations like the Association for Preservation of Virginia Antiquities and other ways to volunteer are great ways for the average individual to actually learn about history and actually engage their history.
Okay. Over the years, I've heard horror stories about people who go hunting history. They're pejoratively called relic hunters,
yes.
And they usually wind up on private or government property where they have no business. In maritime archaeology, I understand, though, there's a bit different relationship with what are called sport divers. It's more kind of a reciprocal thing between that group and archaeologists, is it not?
Yes. It's a little bit more reciprocal because performing scuba dives and other things is a technical thing. So you have to be more careful about what you do. Also, in the 1950s and 60s, when artifacts were first being removed by sport divers from shipwrecks, most of the sport divers readily and quickly learned how fragile they were and how quickly they actually disintegrated. So a lot of sport divers know to leave them in situ. In many places, there are actually laws that govern what can and cannot be removed from a shipwreck and how those cultural heritage materials are actually taken care of. Here in Virginia, we are somewhat lax in those laws, but hopefully here in the future we will strengthen that. The sport divers are a very important asset to maritime archaeology in the state, as well as to the rest of the discipline as a whole, because they can actually provide us information about where wreck sites might be, because they're actively looking for these wreck sites. Not so much for personal gain in many cases, but if a fisherman drags a net over an obstacle or something else and they are sent down to retrieve it, or an outboard is lost overboard, they're the ones who generally find the wrecks first.
Okay. Let's say somebody in Chesapeake Bay or, I don't know, York River discovers a cannon. All right, they take me through the process of preserving that. They keep it in the water, then they get it to the lab, and what happens at that point?
If a cannon were to be found, the first thing that the individual would have to do they'd have to contact either local authorities who would get in touch with the Department of Historic Resources. A choice would be made either to leave it in situ, which would actually may be a good thing to do. Mm-hmm. If it is of historical importance, it may be retrieved and actually taken to a conservation lab. A cannon, if it's made out of iron, would probably either have to go through a lengthy conservation process called electrolysis to actually remove all the chlorine and all the other soluble salts out of the metal so that it would be stable enough. If you were to actually let it dry in its native state, it would probably crumble into a powder due to the corrosion products which need to be converted.
So it's those products that really hasten the breakdown. What about something like a dugout canoe from Native Americans that may be several hundred years old?
A dugout canoe would be a different scenario. You would have deterioration of the cell walls in each one of the cells that make up the structure of the wood. So the only thing that's actually holding that dugout canoe in its shape at that point is the water actually exerting forces on it. So once again, if you were to try to actually dry a piece of wood out that's been in water or in mud or some other aqueous solution for that length of time, it would either shrink and crack into tiny pieces or it would crumble into a powder, depending upon the state of the products. That's why it's so important that when you find something like this, you leave it in situ and you contact an archaeologist or someone else who may know what to do with it. And many people in this area may think that this is something that you'd only find at the coast. However, the riverways around here, especially the Smith River, were part of trade with flat-bottom boats early on in American history. Well, there's potential to find stuff here as well.
It's very interesting. You also have some background in the economics of colonial coinage, and I believe you lectured on that subject several months ago. Tell us a bit about that project.
Yes. I was actually loaned a collection from a friend of mine who is another member of the Archaeological Society of Virginia that was excavated from a site called the Gold Hill site in Hanover County. It was a colonial house that was standing from about 1690 to about 1760, 1770 or so. And the most remarkable artifacts actually recovered during that excavation, which I was not part of, it was excavated in the 1980s, was a collection of colonial coins. And there were several colonial coins from France, Spain, England. There was one even minted in Massachusetts in the 1660s or 1670s. But looking at the coins and the way that things were moving around, it really brings to home how interconnected the American colonies were with other countries. We may have been shipping tobacco and wood and other unprocessed material back to the old world, but we were actually importing the best of the best. We imported French gun flints because they didn't break as easily as the British gun flints. We brought in the best wine bottles that we could, on top of making our own. So all of this, of course, had to come by boat. The ideas, political ideas, and everything else that shaped our country, as well as materials, either shipping raw materials back or importing processed materials.
Does the variety, or in that case the Gold Hill project, did the variety of coins, was that surprising or was that normal? There wasn't obviously a uniform currency in the 17th century, so people took monies of whatever nationality they could?
No, coinage was always scarce during the colonial period, especially in places that were colonies like the United States. So many different currencies would have been used, and there would have been a scale at every local shop that actually had mercantile material for sale. Silver would have been weighed. The main thing, though, is it wasn't so much the country of origin that mattered, it was the purity of the silver. So Spanish coins are very prevalent in archaeological sites, especially in colonial sites in Virginia, because the quality of the silver is better than many other countries. Gold Hill was very surprising because it's actually very rare to find coins at an archaeological site. There were actually 8 coins recovered from this particular site, and that's very, very uncommon because that was probably several months' wage for a local inhabitant at that time.
It raises some interesting questions. You know, what happened? Was it a hasty retreat or what?
It is one of the findings of the Gold Hill excavation. Even though the archaeologists who excavated it were only avocational, they produced a level book and kept very good notes. They also took photographs. And looking back on it, one of the last stratigraphic levels of the basement of this site before it was filled in was charcoal. And some of the artifacts in that layer just below it are a set of mid-1770s wine bottles. This area was actually part of a retreat of British forces during the Revolutionary War. So it's possible that the house was either burnt by its occupants to have the British keep it away, or perhaps the British burnt it. The coins, there could be various reasons why the coins are there. But they link this site to a broader economy, is what they do, and actually show how a small colonial settlement is actually part of something far bigger, and in almost a globalizing way, even back in the 1700s already.
What are some of the, historically, the most interesting excavations that we've had in Virginia, or talk about some of the current fascinating excavations going on?
Certainly the excavations going on at Jamestown are